All right, so let's start with the big story that we're tracking on WION at this hour. Nearly about 45 people are said to have been injured, including 5 with gunshot wounds in Thailand's most violent day of protest so far since the movement began many months ago. Now, hundreds of Thai royalists in yellow shirts demonstrated outside of the parliament to protest against the new constitutional reforms that are presently under consideration. A primary demand of the massive student-led pro-democracy demonstrators has been a change in the constitution to curtail the powers of the king. Several hundreds of supporters of the Thai king gathered in Bangkok and urged the lawmakers to not amend the constitution. Listen in.
มาให้กำลังใจลุงตู่ค่ะเรารักลุงตู่แล้วก็เรารักสถาบันเราไม่ต้องการให้เขามาแก้ไขเปลี่ยนแปลงสถาบันไม่ต้องมาแตะต้องเรื่องสถาบันของเราอยู่กันมาอย่างนี้นานนมแล้วคนรุ่นพ่อรุ่นแม่เราก็รู้ว่าสถาบันน่ะมีเขาเรียกอะไรอ่ะคุณูปการแบบดูแลพวกเราอย่างดีพวกเราอยู่ดีมีสุขทุกวันนี้ก็เพราะสถาบันพระมหากษัตริย์ใช่ไหมแล้วทำไมจะต้องมายุ่งวุ่นวายจะมาปรับปรุงนู่นนี่ไปยุ่งอะไรกับเขาคือสวรรค์เราอะคือเหวเราอยู่ต่ำกว่าเขาเราต้องรู้อย่ามาพูดว่าจะต้องการความเท่าเทียมมันไม่มีคำว่าเท่าเทียมในโลกนี้
Now, the Thai riot police fired water cannons at the pro-democracy protesters who tried to make their way through the wide barricades outside of the parliament as lawmakers discuss possible changes to the constitution. The protesters are demanding for changes to the constitution drawn up by Thailand's former junta. They also want the immediate sacking of the incumbent Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha, a former military general who seized power in a coup in 2014. And they're also asking for reforms to curb the powers for the monarchy. The motion is being currently debated in a 2-day parliamentary session with the anti-government protesters vowing to lay siege and also camp outside of the parliament until their demands are met. Lawmakers are considering proposals to amend the constitution, which is one of the core demands of the pro-democracy movement. 7 draft constitutional amendments are scheduled to be voted on in the 2-day joint session.
คงมีคนเข้ามานะครับแต่ว่าที่ได้ขอร้องไปแล้วว่ายังไงที่นี่ก็ยินดีต้อนรับผู้มานะแต่ว่าขอให้โดยสงบนะครับโดยสงบแล้วก็อย่าไปคุกคามไม่ว่าด้วยวาจาหรือด้วยอาการอะไรก็ตามให้อย่าไปให้สมาชิกได้มีสิทธิ์ในการพิจารณาวาระของเขาตามปกติ
Now, Thailand has been in the grip of political turmoil for quite a few years now, but tensions have escalated since protesters began questioning the powers of the king. The Thailand's lèse majesté law forbids any critique of the monarchy, which is now punishable with a sentence of as much as about 10 years. And to give us more insights in terms of what is playing out in Thailand at this point of time, we're joined by Matthias Spear, who is a South Asia correspondent based out of Bangkok, and he's joining us live on this broadcast from WION. Matthias, get us up to speed with what is happening in the protest. Nearly about 45 people, we're given to understand, have been injured in the clashes between the protesters and the police earlier this morning.
Yeah, it was a very violent day we've seen yesterday in front of the parliament. It was the most violent day in the recent months when those anti-government protests started in about July. And the newest figures we have received now from the authorities is that 55 people were injured yesterday during those clashes and 6 people sustained gunshot wounds. It is not clear yet who fired those guns. The police said it was not them. That only leaves the 2 sides of protesters that were gathering in front of the parliament yesterday. One side, the pro-royalist yellow shirts, and on the other side, the pro-democracy camp. They were basically standing opposite of each other yesterday. And first, the day started with clashes between pro-democracy activists and the police when the activists tried to remove some concrete barriers in front of the parliament. And then later, the police removed itself from the scene a little bit, and then clashes between the yellow shirts and the pro-democracy activists took place. And yeah, apparently many people got injured yesterday. After that, the protesters said they would stop their protest. They initially planned to stay overnight, but now they stopped the protest for now, and they said they want to continue this afternoon in an area in central Bangkok, next to the biggest shopping malls of the city. So there's another huge protest expected this afternoon.
Absolutely, indeed. And also, Matthias, you've been tracking the story very closely. Give us some insights into these pro-royalist groups who are now taking the streets of Bangkok, because these pro-democracy protesters had been out on the streets for the last several months. They've been demanding constitutional reforms that are now being considered within the Thai parliament. But in the last few weeks, we are seeing an upsurge in these pro-royalist supporters of the king. Who are these people? Are they being funded by the royalty in Thailand?
Yeah, it is not exactly clear who those people are. What we know is that the group of those yellow shirts is much smaller than the pro-democracy camp that has been on the streets. Tens of thousands of people were joining them in their calls for reform in the country. And we've seen, yeah, I would say hundreds, maybe a few thousands of so-called yellow shirts, the royalist camp also on the street. Sometimes we've also seen that those people were brought in with police trucks, and we are also hearing that, for example, employees of state-owned companies are also asked basically to join the pro-establishment groups protesting. So the government and its supporters, it wants to show that there are two sides of this story at the moment, and that there are not only the pro-democracy activists protesting at the moment. The yellow shirts, they say that any change of the constitution that is now being discussed in parliament, that any change would negatively affect the monarchy. And they say they fear that the pro-democracy camp even wants to abolish the monarchy completely. Pro-democracy activists say this is not true. They just want to bring the monarchy under the constitution. But yeah, those are the two sides that are playing out on the streets right now. And yeah, unfortunately, very violent yesterday.
Absolutely. And Matthias, just before we let you go, a few days ago, we heard from the king where he said that Thailand is a land of compromise. And now these reforms to the constitution for Thailand are being discussed within the Thai parliament. How far is the Thai government now willing to go to accommodate the demands of these protesters? Because one of the key demands of the protesters is that they want the incumbent Prime Minister, Prayut Chan-o-cha, to be sacked. Is he, at this point of time, willing to step down?
He is not, but he is willing to give in a little bit on the demand regarding a reform of the constitution. The government coalition has also introduced a bill to parliament that would make a reform of the constitution possibly. But they are imagining a very lengthy process that could take months or years until the constitution is actually changed. And I'm not sure if the protesters are willing to give them as much time as they want to have.
I have to leave you there. Thank you very much indeed, Matthias P., for joining us from Bangkok and getting us all those updates.